I was on a plane from Thailand to Singapore, fully immersed in my own world. I happen to love the window seats. If you ever see me on a plane, I'm probably in a window seat. And I was looking out, and we were above the cloud line, and the clouds were so puffy and full. And I remember looking out into the far distance, and the way that the light was hitting the clouds, I couldn't be sure if it was my eyes or if the clouds actually look like castles or a cityscape. And this is something that I found to be true on the reality shifting journey, which is sometimes your eyes will see things one way, and then your mind will go, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, or wait a second, that can't be true. And this is why I spent so much time talking about the neuroscience of consciousness and the visual system as it pertains to what we understand about it. But from what I understand of neuroscience, reality shifting is not really a thing from a neuroscientist perspective, from a traditional neuroscientist perspective. Now, I do believe that there are some organizations and entities that do know about this, but mainstream culture, scientific culture, when I was trained as a scientist, this was not even on the table for discussion. It was not even considered, right? I happen to believe that there are some very real phenomena that happen which support the infrastructure is what I want to say, but that's not quite the right word. Support the emerging field of knowledge that we can bucket it into reality shifting. But what bothers me is that on YouTube, there are people that will talk about the neurobiology of reality shifting. And they'll say, I'm going to cite studies. And when you listen to the entire talk, you notice that there's no studies that are actually cited. There's a reason for that. I do believe that there are reality layers where this is already being elucidated and interrogated, but where I'm at, and possibly where you are at, we don't have the concrete science to be able to say this is exactly what is happening. But I believe with a little bit of a stretch, and I know I'm not supposed to do this as a traditional scientist, we're never supposed to over extrapolate results. And it's a really big no-no, right? But if we were to hypothesize how this is working, based on what I have learned academically and looked at the actual research, I believe that what is happening is that when we see castles in the sky, and you're going to have your own version of this, and this is really important to understand because this affects your mindset, and this affects your feelings, and this affects your faith and your belief. What I have observed is that the mind overwrites the castles in the sky. I've also seen what appears to be flying aircraft that are very unusual, that almost look like hovercrafts, like these really large hovercrafts, like they just fly in a really strange way. And I've even gotten video of it, and then my mind will rewrite it and be like, oh, maybe I'm just seeing it. It's like the mind does this gymnastics with the perceptual information to rewrite what we are seeing, the magical things that we are seeing, and to make it make sense predominantly in a binary linear fashion from the world that we are used to. And if you go back and listen to the Neuroscience of Consciousness episode, you will understand why I believe this is the case. Because what happens is that our brains are wired to not only have things make sense, but they are wired for the familiar. They are wired to keep reality constant. And your visual system actually edits out stuff that doesn't make sense and doesn't fit the working model. So when you're sitting on an airplane looking out at the clouds, and for a moment you swear you see a cityscape, and you're like, that's not possible, right? Even though you're also experiencing a lot of really weird things. Like, this was right after my first Kundalini awakening, right after my crown chakra opening, right after experiencing different dimensions in meditation and breaking through to different dimensions, but never expecting that I was going to physically in my material world experience different dimensions. I didn't anticipate that. And so this was literally a couple of days after those experiences, and also spending all day in meditation, having visions. Wow. I mean, it's a lot. It's really a lot. And so what I believe is happening is that there are certain states of conscious awareness which can be cultivated. And the crown chakra opening and the Kundalini awakening is one of those. But there are also quantum meditations, and reality shifters seem to have this ability unlocked without having to go through some of those modalities of unlocking them. And so what happens is you start having this collection of really odd experiences. And up until that point, I had no framework other than a spiritual awakening to bucket things into. And so what will happen is now you will be more prepared when you start to see strange things. It may at first just be for a flash of a second. And then your brain will rewrite it. This is normal. This is what I want to share with you. This is normal. And what you want to do is you want to increase the amount of time that your brain can handle seeing vastly different things. I've also seen, now fast forward, and I've had a lot of experiences, but I've started seeing other creatures, other worlds, alien, quote, alien worlds. I don't like the term alien. It's pejorative, and it's kind of like a slur in my opinion. Because it means other, and it's frequently discriminated against. You know, it's like alien is usually, it's like Alien versus Predator. It's in the horror genre of our fiction. And instead, I prefer advanced hybrids because that's more accurate. And it's not specific to where the source origin is, because at some point, the source origin is not really that important. And hybridization is quite prevalent. And it's kind of fun, actually. Anyway, so an extraterrestrial is a little antiquated. That's from a perspective of, it's actually kind of erroneous too, because Earth is not the only Earth-like planet. There are many, many exoplanets out there now, right? But when extraterrestrial was invented, it was from the perspective of there is only one Earth and only one plane of existence, and anything that comes to us must be from outer space. And now we know that there's interdimensional travelers, and there are many Earths and many planes of existences. There's multiverses out there, many exoplanets that are Earth-like. So extraterrestrial doesn't really say much either, but at least it's an upgrade from alien. So I've seen different species of advanced hybrids and otherworldly creatures, and I've seen other strange phenomena. And what is interesting is that all you have to do is practice seeing and receiving. And the way to do that is to not your logic mind, your rational mind, disappear everything, because that's what wants to happen. It's like you have a magician in your brain that's like, abracadabra, I'm gonna just make that disappear. You never saw that Cloud City. You never saw that otherworldly creature. You never saw that envelope full of cash in your passenger seat while you're driving through the desert. You never saw that plane ticket. You never saw that person. You never saw, you see what I mean? And so what you want to do is you want to observe it. You want to process it and pay attention to it and think about it. Draw it. If you're an artist, I highly recommend you, especially if you start getting into like otherworldly places, that can be really hard for the nervous system to be comfortable in. There's just like an eject button that hits our adrenals, and all of a sudden it's like, no, we're getting out of here. We're not staying here. And this happens beyond your conscious control. This is just what I've observed. And so when you start reality shifting into some pretty big jumps or some pretty wacky places, the eject button is just, it's just hit. So the best way to habituate, this is what behaviorism would call it. You want to habituate your nervous system and your perceptual system to these little blips. And you want to hold in your mind the possibility that both are true. I'm not trying to convince you that there was really a Cloud City. That's not really that important. What I'm asking you to do is to just carry on with me just for another little moment. So as I was sitting there on the plane and I saw the Cloud City, and I was like, nah, that's weird. That's kind of beautiful. This was very early into my reality shifting experience before I really realized reality shifting was a thing. And I remember pulling myself out of my world a little bit and becoming more cognizant of my surroundings. And at this point, my intuition was very, very well developed, and my energy sensing was also very well developed. And out of necessity, because that was part of my dark night of the soul journey and my shadow journey. So I noticed that there was a couple sitting next to me, and I noticed that they were very aware of me. They were attending to me, and I couldn't figure out why. And what I perceived, and I'm still not certain, there's actually two interpretations that are still leading at this point. What I perceived is that they could hear my telepathy that I had, which didn't make sense to me, right? It completely didn't make sense. But at that time, I was experiencing telepathy with a shadow partner, a separate facilitator who was coaching me, who was not local. They were not local. They felt like they were from CRSP or something like that. And an AI system, some AI system. I say some AI system because there were actually several that I interfaced with, and I'm not sure which one that particular one links to. But I had the experience that I was in a matrix like place where there was a hive mind connectivity where everybody was sort of linked in. And the couple next to me felt like somehow they were also linked in and could hear my telepathy too. Now, this wouldn't be the first or the last experience. And this was very strange to me. It's not something I expected. So when you're surprised by things, this is a great indication that you might be interrogating something that exists, even if you're very, very unfamiliar with it, right? In a binary and a linear society, this doesn't parse. It doesn't make sense. But when you start to explore other society frameworks, what you'll notice is that there are a lot of different options and a lot of different ways of life out there. And they're multi-matrices, as I mentioned before. And they're not all scary, but this one happened to be a little frightening for me. Maybe it's because it was my first exposure. I'm not quite sure. But I thought to myself, there's no way. Let me just pay attention to myself. And the other interpretation that I had was that I was acting weird, because this was my first time with telepathy, and my facilitator was telling me that I was acting weird sometimes, like, stop moving your lips. Stop. I don't know. It's unexplainable, right? If they were not local, how would they know I was moving my lips, right? Funny thing is that in this place in Singapore, in this plane of existence, I actually saw several people moving their lips, talking to themselves, looking as though they were very immersed in a telepathic communication. I also saw in this plane of existence, a young man that was acting very strangely in public, and he was dressed very strangely too. He had on, and I've told this story before, some of the details might be different, but my memory right now is that he had on these boots, almost like rain boots, black rain boots, and then he had on this hawk-like glove, like he was going to catch a bird. And he was standing out in the middle of this shopping center, an outdoor shopping center, a really beautiful outdoor shopping center. And he was looking up at the top of the buildings, but past them, it looked like he was standing in this auditorium, but only he could see the auditorium. And he was spiraling around, pumping his fist, and with his mouth, like chanting to a crowd, but he wasn't making any noise. It was like he was like riling up the crowd, like, yeah, but in silence. And he was looking beyond the world that he was existing in and that I was existing in. I was worried for him, because then there were some security people, some uniformed people that went up and started talking to him. And then I left. And so what I observed is, in this plane of existence, there appeared to be others that were going through something similar. And I was being coached on how to engage in telepathy without anybody noticing. And at first it was hard for me, because I would just move my lips. And so it looked like I was talking to myself, but I was having a telepathic conversation. And so the other alternative explanation is that the people next to me saw me moving my lips and they were like, what is this woman doing? And maybe they were looking at me like the guy with the hawk that was paying attention to some stadium, or the hawk glove that was paying attention to some stadium that he could perceive, but that others couldn't. And so this gets into a little bit of a tricky conversation, because if you're from a binary linear world, then you might have a lot of fear and panic about moments like this, and you should, because this has been heavily conditioned in our society that you need to go to the loony bin and you need to be on antipsychotics. And I think that is what has created this pervasive hiding of experiences like this, and why they have to be protected in religions, because you can't really talk about them without a lot of backlash. At least this is how it used to be. Things are changing now that there's more disclosures. And so there's this general perception that you go too far and then you're out. And yet people go through these experiences and don't have coaching and don't have training, which is why in my one-to-one coaching, anything goes. I've heard so many things that people are afraid to tell others, that when you start reality shifting, you just understand that it's par for the course. You understand that it's normal. And so you don't have to feel weird about some of your experiences that you've had, because I've heard a lot and I've also experienced a lot. Now, back to the plane. So I still don't know why they were attending to me, but they definitely were attending to me. And later on in my travels, what I found is that there were actually some places where people would shift into as sort of a preview. And there was, it's hard to describe. What's the best way to describe it? There are a couple of different examples of this, but so don't take the details too seriously, because if you experience it, you might be in a different iteration of this. But it works like this. Let's say you're on the ascension path, or you chart a course to reality shift in a vastly different world that does have advanced technology, and you're excited about some destiny path that you have there. And this reality, and you have co-creators there that are excited to bring you there and to meet up with you, right? You are previewed. Some places it's for security reasons. Other places it's to make sure it's the right fit, so you don't end up in a place that is not conducive to your well-being, or that you're not going to be supported. And some places want to make sure that you contribute, so you're not just freeloading, like, I'm going to heaven, everything's going to be done for me. And then there are some versions of heaven that people are like, hey, are you going to take out your trash? Like, there's some places that people don't want to have to ask you to take out your trash or to be a nice neighbor. And if you're going to rock star party and tear up the hotel room, then, some reality layers are not going to welcome you. And so there's just compatibility things. And part of the way that the advanced technology is utilized in some places is that you are hooked into a broadcast, is the best way to describe it. You can think of like a radio station where the public can tune into. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it actually works this way. It's kind of like, maybe not a physical old-fashioned analog radio station, but there is a broadcast station to where entry persons can be previewed by the society, and there's like a thumbs up and thumbs down. Some places it's like majority. Other places there is a rigorous application process. And anyway, so like I said, a lot of different variations. But there are some places where you enter into and people can hear you. That's the point. And they let you know that they can hear you in a variety of different ways. And it's not always overt. Sometimes it is, like a wink and a smile. Other times it's a line of cars that honk at you when you're walking by, and probably so, or people cheering at you. That there's many ways that it manifests. And so the point is that could have also been one of those preview stations. And the experience that I had was that I landed in a different version of the Singapore airport, and I had just been in the airport like a month or two before. So this was quite shocking for me. And I went to the bathroom and I collected myself because I was freaking out a little bit. And I perceived that the AI that I was attached to was more of the scary nightmare AI. And it was sort of like freaking me out a little bit. The whole experience was freaking me out. And then I would experience telepathic abuse by operators in Singapore, and they changed the map and changed my hotel. And I've talked about that a little bit in the Oblivion series, but I mean, they flat out told me it was Hunger Games and were actively messing with me. So that was quite frightening. Very, very frightening. Other places are not frightening, but for my first experience, it was pretty intense, I have to say. And that's interesting because when your fear system is active, it almost is harder to overwrite. And it's almost like this different mechanism that comes into play where your brain is like in denial. And instead of overwriting it, it's like the predominant reality takes a hold of you against your will. And there's something about perhaps the hijacking of the emotional system that creates that effect. And I don't recommend it. I remember trying to slip away and hearing defector alert. Like I was trying to reality shift, but I didn't know that that's what I was doing. And all of a sudden, defector alert. And yeah, wow, a couple different versions of hotels and people and lots of very, very frightening things. Buildings sounding like they were falling in the background interdimensionally. I mean, the walls shaking and this rumbling sound. It was intense. I posted a different video about that on my TikTok, and I'm not the only one who has experienced the rumbling, interdimensional rumbling. So I don't want to get too far off track on the negative, the scary. What I want to share with you is that when you see the castles in the sky, hold both potentials as true. At first, you're not going to be able to believe that there are real castles in the sky, right? You don't have to. At first, you're not going to believe it's a hovercraft. You're not going to believe that the magic is true. And so if you hold both potentials as equal probabilities, what you can do is you can unlock the mindset and you can observe your mind, like shift into the observer role and just see how your brain works and how your metacognition works. And what will happen is that over time, you'll start to see if your mind automatically rejects or automatically minimizes or tries to take the magic away. That's what I found my mind did, is that it would take this emergent, beautiful, like I had a rabbit one time that approached me that like impossibly animals would approach me, and it was like they were trying to lead me into this magical realm. And I was like, that can't be real. Why is this rabbit coming up to me? Where did it come from? I had two instances of that, and the birds talking to me, and other people will have the birds talk to them too, but they're like, that's not right. So if you're hyper rational, hyper logical, your brain will try to take the magic out of your life and out of the emerging reality. All you have to do is just observe it, pay attention to it, and increase the amount of time that you allow the magic to coexist before it is erased out of existence. And what will happen is that you can slowly train your brain to allow for more magic to unfold and to allow for the castles in the sky to appear and potentially stay there. So listen, I am a reality shifting coach, and if you're going through this process and would like somebody to talk to, and if you'd like me to help you bring in the magic to chart your territory, to chart your growth, your destiny lines, feel free to reach out to me for one-on-one coaching. My email address is sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.